Pereira, and I'll be your moderator today. I am a project assistant at Scrap Weapons, a disarmament project housed at SOAS University of London. Here at Scrap, we aim to reframe the debate around disarmament, emphasizing the need to focus on the elimination of weapons of mass destruction, the limitations of all types of conventional weapons, and the development of confidence and security building measures. We are here today to debate the urgent need to reinvigorate multilateral process in disarmament, as emphasized by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in his new Agenda for Peace. SCRAP is leading the formation of an impact coalition with like-minded peace-building organizations advocating for reactivation of the UN mechanism for special sessions on disarmament, which is a global disarmament conference at the UN General Assembly. We will be discussing the importance of this process with our experts today. After all the presentations are completed, we will have a discussion, so please feel free to turn on your microphones and cameras. We will really appreciate your participation in our debate. We are joined today by Eloisa Romani, Professor Dan Plesch and Monalisa Hazarika from Scrap Weapons, and Sean Connor from the International Peace Bureau, after which we will move then for a discussion. Please, Eloisa,
yes.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Welcome all to our side event. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here. Thank you for joining. I'm Eloisa Romani. I'm coordinator of Scrap Weapons Project. As Amanda said, we are a disarmament project housed at SOAS University of London. And our project advocates for general and complete disarmament, which has an agenda that targets all kinds of conventional arms and not just nuclear weapons. Our main focus in the past 2 years has been campaigning to build global consensus among states and civil society to propose the reactivation of the disarmament mechanism of the United Nations, which has been forgotten for almost 40 years. And this is a global disarmament conference within the United Nations General Assembly, which is technically known as Special Session on Disarmament. It's a conference that will last about 2 months, just to give you an idea. So it's a very important event, and this will involve all UN member states to talk about how to address contemporary problems related to arms proliferation, illegal arms trade, risk of nuclear attacks, effects on the environment, and an increase of violence against women, children, marginalized communities. At the core of our humanitarian disarmament advocacy is to understand that it is not enough to defend human rights and women's rights if disarmament policies are not brought into the equation. In fact, the lived experiences of women, marginalized communities in conflict zones around the world are affected by the production, trade, and supply of arms, such as small arms and light weapons, which serve the use of force to perpetuate crimes such as sexual violence as a weapon of war, leading to human trafficking and slavery. These are the unaccounted realities that disproportionately affect women in conflicts. And this story needs to be at the center of the debate on why disarmament is important for human rights. We acknowledge that there is a resistance in mainstream debates on disarmament because fostering a culture of weapons possession is inbuilt in patriarchal culture worldwide, especially because arms proliferation benefits the powerful economies of the global north and their military industrial complex that feeds on warmongering. So we believe that all war states, especially those from the global south and those affected by conflicts, should have their voice heard. And this will be possible in a forum such as the UN Special Session on Disarmament, for which we are advocating. So as of now, there is a general agreement that the institution that has so far been tasked with negotiating disarmament treaties, which is the Conference on Disarmament, and is based in Geneva, is no longer fit for purpose. There is a lack of political will, compounded by procedural mechanisms which are problematic, such as the rule of consensus, that block any genuine progress in disarmament talks in this institution. Then the Conference on Disarmament has been delegated by the UN to negotiate treaties, but is not part of the UN. Therefore, only 65 countries have membership, which makes it unfit in terms of democratic representation of war states. So we believe that at the outset of conflict escalation in Europe and the Middle East and the ensuing human crisis, the time has arrived to have serious disarmament talks. The UN General Assembly would be a better forum than the Conference on Disarmament to get all states to discuss the importance of reducing the risks of global war and nuclear annihilation. So UN special sessions devoted to the subject of disarmament were already held in 1978, 1982, and 1988, but a fourth never occurred due to lack of political will. However, we praise the efforts of Brazil and Indonesia for having kept momentum on the importance of a special session on disarmament for many years, bringing up proposals for resolution at the UN First Committee sessions, which have, however, not received enough support so far. So that's a problem, and we are trying to build momentum towards this goal. In light of this, Scrap Weapons is now leading the formation of an impact coalition of global civil society organizations with the objective to lobby UN member states to vote a resolution at the next UN General Assembly First Committee session in October 2024, which should identify a date to establish a preparatory committee, hopefully in 2025, to discuss the objectives and agenda to convene a special session on disarmament, possibly by 2026. So we invite you all to join our impact coalition and get in contact with us, also in writing to us. Our email, my colleagues will post it in the chat, is scrap.weapons@soas.ac.uk. Scrap Weapons campaign has already achieved an important milestone in obtaining inclusion of a recommendation for a special session on disarmament into the UN Secretary General's new Agenda for Peace policy brief issued in July 2023. And in last February, we were successful in obtaining the incorporation of a special session on disarmament proposal into the zero draft of the Pact of the Future. And we now wish to request inclusion of this global disarmament conference into the Summit of the Future agenda. So again, we invite you to join our global coalition to have a stronger impact and support states who are championing this important UN disarmament conference. So that concludes for now my intervention. I thank you all for your attention and look forward to the speech of colleagues and to having questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eloisa. Thanks for highlighting how important it is to have a special session and explaining a bit more about it to our public. Next speaker is Professor Dan Plesch, Director of SCRAP and Professor of Diplomacy and Strategy at the SOAS University of London. Please, Professor.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for chairing today. This is extremely important discussion, and the dialogue in Nairobi and then in New York is of great international importance. The sad truth is that when we turn on our monitors, our TV screens, and see the weapons that are doing the killing in Ukraine, in Gaza, that may do the killing in Southeast Asia, in the Chinese littoral. Yes, there are some proposals about small arms. Yes, there are ongoing discussions about nuclear weapons. But the tanks, the warships, the missiles, the artillery guns that we see doing the killing every day are not on the UN agenda. And they are hardly on the NGO agenda, because the NGO agenda is mostly one about humanitarian treaties concocted in the romantic period at the end of the Cold War, that we didn't have to worry about the major weapons because they weren't going to be used. Would that was the case? Would that was the case? Now, yes, absolutely, Eloisa gave a great outline. Yes, the UN needs to change its mechanisms, but it also needs concrete proposals and to change the political will. And we know that our members, the people, our relatives, the people we talk to in bars, aren't going to get excited about changing UN mechanisms, even if we are occasionally ourselves. But we have to tackle these major weapons. And how? Now, I am ancient, and when I was a wee banner-waving protester, our leaders said, we're confronted with the weapons in Europe, East and West, zero missiles. And eventually, the panic in America and with Gorbachev, they took this slogan from our banners and turned it into what was the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And to this day, President Putin is denied thousands of missiles, even though he broke the treaty in the end, but he's denied thousands of missiles to devastate Ukraine even more, which is why you see missiles fired from aircraft and from the sea, because the ones for the army were very largely literally scrapped, chopped up under the treaty, verifiably. Now, if we could do that out of the extreme tensions of the Cold War, I think we should consider taking to the UN, taking to our civil society partners, the idea of zero missiles. Now, back in the time of Saddam Hussein, there was a limit set of, I think, 75 or 100 kilometers. Well, you can take that at the minimum. And you know what? Very few countries in the world, very few countries in the global south have missiles of more than 75 or 100-kilometer range. So there's a real interest and an ability of the developing world to rally to the idea of zero missiles. And my goodness, we see it. The Iranians fire off hundreds, the Israelis and their allies shoot them all down. Well, you're going to see what goes on also in Ukraine. They do get through. And it's these missiles that are driving the race, either conventional, so-called conventional, non-nuclear, high explosive missiles, or we fear nuclear. So there's an interest in the developing world because they don't have them anyway. But also, if you look at the dynamic between the United States, China, and Russia, which is increasingly hazardous, and although we can say, oh, well, nobody rationally would start the war, nobody rational would have invaded Ukraine. Frankly, nobody rational really would have invaded Iraq. So I thank myself every time I wake up and we find how we have not got a conflagration. But if we're to tackle that, we need to listen to these debates seriously. And I'm sorry, TPNW, it isn't just nuclear. For the Chinese and the Russians, they are, I have nothing to say for the governments in those countries, but they have a concern that the Americans and their allies can knock out their nukes just using their smart conventional weapons. And they talk about this repeatedly. And in the West, NATO, we are deaf to that. And the think tank community is deaf to that concern. And they shouldn't be. And they also then have a real interest in controlling missiles. And to be frank, Western taxpayers and the US, if we get this action-reaction cycle of missile, anti-missile, anti-missile, missile, it goes on to madness, which is why back in the 70s, there was an agreement between the US and the Russians not to get into this missile, missile, missile action-reaction cycle. And we need to rekindle those debates. And I put it to you that much as we would like to have a better mechanism at the UN, and much as I wouldn't want to frighten countries who just want a better mechanism, we need to be concentrating our minds and thinking about concrete demands that maybe can energize people and change the debate, which is why I offer to you, and no ideas are new. This idea partly comes from our protests in the 80s and the INF Treaty, the Reagan-Gorbachev Treaty, but in fact, one of the presidents of the Council on Foreign Relations made a proposal in, I think, 1990 or so and there's an article which I drew on his work, which we can share with you, also suggested zero missiles. So there's some background to such a proposal. Now, I don't want to go on further. I think I'm out of my time. And there are many other things to debate. So I just would say, in a nutshell, though, we need to have a unified intersectional approach on disarmament. and have a conference of a couple of months at the UN that sets a new agenda, sets up new structures, enables issues to come forward, and integrates this now atomized, separate intersectional agenda and integrate it. And hopefully zero missiles can play some unifying role in that cause. So that's my 2 cents. And if you have been, thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor. Yeah, the truth is that our global architecture does not reflect the realities of today anymore, and does not serve the purpose. And we have to be reminded these structures were set up in 1945. So there's a need to reform the architecture that is more and more evident as technology develops and we fail to solve security challenges. The next speaker is Monalisa Hazarika, who is a constant at Scrap Weapons, and she's deeply engaged in research on small weapons and organized crime. Please, Monalisa.
Yep. Thank you, Amanda, for your kind introduction. Today, I will be speaking briefly on the proliferating trends of privately manufactured firearms, which has come about with the convergence of emerging technologies such as additive manufacturing with that of the larger array of conventional weapons. Now, additive manufacturing, colloquially known as 3D printing, has dramatically expanded in recent years to accommodate the manufacturing accessibility requirements of producers, both authorized and illicit alike. The speed, accuracy, and the relative ease with which private actors can build parts and components of a functioning firearm have profoundly influenced the way gun ownership is regulated and have opened a Pandora's box of forthcoming challenges. The anonymity associated with both the acquisition and use of such weapons, despite their initial setup cost, is what makes them the weapon of choice for many individuals, especially in countries where national laws restrict the legal acquisition of firearms. Today, there are an array of fully 3D printed, hybrid, or PKC, which stands for Parts Kits Conversion firearm designs, made of polymer and metal components, which are also available on the internet. While it is not as easy as clicking Control and Print, the current advent of the technological innovation has blurred the barriers to acquiring a firearm, which is only bound to expand with the decreasing production costs and rising quality, making them a promising alternative to purchasing their industrial counterparts on the black market. Now, while talking about 3D printed firearms or weapons in general, it is important to remember that a lot has changed since the single-shot .38 ACP Liberator was released by Defense Distributed that made headlines back in 2013. The blueprints or the computer-aided design CAD files are no longer limited to the households or workplaces of hobbyists and enthusiasts. This was established by Europol last year in December 2023, when they dismantled 10 illegal firearm workshops across Canada, Germany, Spain, and the United Kingdom, with recorded cases of their use in attempted murders in Iceland, a mass shooting in the Halle Synagogue, and the arrest for their illicit manufacture in Indiana and Winnipeg in the US in relation to ISIS terror groups. These weapons have found their way in major armed conflict by the People's Defense Forces, PDF, in Myanmar. Now, 3D printed firearms and their components are within the scope of the existing international instruments regulating the transfer of small arms and light weapons, namely the UN Programme of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons, the UN POA, the Firearm Protocol, and also the Arms Trade Treaty, under which the method of production is irrelevant. Perhaps the most important is the UN POA, adopted by all UN member states in 2001, which is going to have its 4th review conference next month and is a platform for states to report on their progress in implementing the commitments and also deliberating on the novel and pressing issues regarding their illicit trade. Now, previously in 2015, at the second meeting of government experts, The overarching theme of discussion was the growing threat of fabrication and sharing of schematics for undetectable firearms. While some of the states considered it as exaggerated given their operational limits, constraining major dangers in the years ahead, others appraised it to be an imminent threat. In fact, at the third REFCON, which took place in 2018, states noted that recent developments in small arms and light weapons manufacturing, technology, and design, and welcome initiatives that raise awareness of possible associated risks, notably the difficulties encountered in marking and tracing these quote-unquote ghost guns. Now, despite pushback, there has been considerable pushback seen in the inclusion of 3D printing, polymer, and modular weapons, inclusion of certain terms in the draft outcome document, with state expressing concerns over their explicit mention inhibiting their access to technology and how the situation was not as dire as being portrayed. While a technical annex to the International Tracing Instrument, ITI, which is part of the UNPOA, was proposed during the third REFCON, but was ultimately dropped. Suggestions of using less aggressive and generic language and removing the paragraphs altogether suggest a lack of agreement on the severity of the issue, let alone a consensus to adopt measures for the changing security landscape. Now, despite the back and forth on the language used from distributed manufacturing to additive manufacturing, the outcome document had no reference to 3D printing and backtracked on the limited progress made by the states who had pushed for more. While the fourth REFCON presents opportunity to assess the current state of play in the use and misuse of technology, and alternatively, how new monitoring technologies could be used to effectively track and control small arms and light weapons throughout the entire life cycle, some experts are of the opinion that the UNPOA and its ITI are too weak and inflexible to address the problems of illicit trade and manufacturing of firearms posed by additive manufacturing due to, and I quote, vague or unelaborated commitments and agreements which are politically and not legally binding. So even though the issues surrounding additive manufacturing may appear incidental, their growing usage across fields, including nuclear and in the missile space, merits greater consideration than the lowest common denominator and should be on the radar of security analysts. This is where the fourth special session on disarmament comes in extremely strategic to address some of these previously unanticipated technological advancement and supporting the existing frameworks. By bolstering existing norms and regulation and keeping them relevant to the emerging threats, progress can be ensured on issues that have already been identified and anticipated in this sphere. I believe a special session on disarmament would be useful apparatus for states to tackle the loss of critical momentum and a watered-down version of diplomatic deliberations. That's all from me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Monalisa. Me particularly, I have a very few knowledge on 3D weapons, so it was very interesting knowing more. Next speaker is Sean Connor. He is the Executive Director of the International Peace Bureau. Please, Sean.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you to all the other speakers for such great remarks. I've learned a lot from all of you as well here, so thank you for that. I'll try to be brief, and if I'm taking too long, Amanda, please feel free to cut me off. But my topic today is common security as it relates to disarmament, and particularly the special session to disarmament and the Summit of the Future. For those unfamiliar with common security as a concept, I will go through a very brief explanation, and I'll also post a link to reports that we worked together on with the ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation, and the Olof Palme International Center that was released just about 2 years ago now. But common security has its roots in the Cold War confrontation of the 1980s in particular. As was said by Dan earlier, of course, this period of the Cold War, there was a recognition among the great powers in conflict with each other that they could risk the entire planet were they to come into direct conflict with each other. And this formed the basis of a commission that met for the first time in the 1980s called the Independent Commission on Disarmament and Security Issues, also known colloquially as the Olof Palme the Olof Palme Commission, named after the former Prime Minister, or at the time, the Prime Minister of Sweden. The central recognition was just that we cannot create security for ourselves at the expense of our adversaries, but rather need to work together to create a common security, something that works for all of us and that can make sure that we all can feel secure. Their principal recommendations included, of course, conventional disarmament and, in particular, nuclear disarmament, and trust building measures to help bridge this gap between the East and the West at the time. Of course, now in the 2020s, times have changed a lot. We're no longer in a bipolar system of two great powers confronting one another, but we are seeing ourselves enter a new period, as the General Secretary of the UN, Antonio Guterres, has outlined, and many other experts, moving away from a post-Cold War order to a new multipolar order. And as this arises, there is again a risk of great power confrontation in new frontiers, as well as the ripple effects that this can have. And we see now more than ever it is important to underline this need for a common security. This also comes into play when we think, for example, of the threats that climate change poses, which of course know no borders and cannot be secured by any one country alone, but only in collaboration and cooperation. And threats such as we saw with the COVID-19 pandemic, but also global inequality. And all of these issues are things that we need to find solutions for together. And for that, we've proposed the term common security. In the UN Secretary General's new agenda for peace, he mentions the term collective security, which has a lot of overlap with our term. I'm not sure if I'm able to share my screen, if that's all right, maybe just quickly to show a few concepts from common security. We'll see if this works. You can let me know if you can see my screen okay. Yep. So here I just briefly want to show the principles of common security based in this, this document that we worked on in 2022. 6 basic principles. The first is that all people have the right to human security, a freedom from fear, and a freedom from want. The second is that we need to build trust between nations and peoples as fundamental to create a sustainable human existence. Number 3 is that we need complete nuclear disarmament, as well as strong limitations on conventional weapons and reduced military expenditure. 4 is the need for global cooperation, as well as regional cooperation, multilateralism, and the rule of law. The 5th focuses on the importance of dialogue, conflict prevention, and confidence building measures. And the final one covers the regulation for new military technologies and the need for international governance in these fields, as Monalisa had talked about, but of course also artificial intelligence, cyberspace, outer space, so on and so forth. There are a lot of areas that are not covered under international law. And briefly to mention the collective security definition by Antonio Guterres, the focus there is primarily on the need to build trust, solidarity between nations, and universality of international law that it applies equally to all parties. So this is sort of the framework we're working in. And now to turn briefly to this special session on disarmament. I know I'm already running low on time here, but we've seen with the most recent CIPRI data reports that in 2023, the world spent $2.443 trillion on the military. There were increases across all 5 geographical regions. And I think many of us here also can just sense the tensions on the international stage are on the rise. People are afraid, and governments are looking for ways to protect their people, if we think of it in if we think of them as honest players. That's an open question. But at the end of the day, they try to make us feel more secure, to create security within countries. And a lot of the bigger nations, of course, know quite well that that global security is inextricably linked, that no country can make itself safe without interacting with the rest of the world. But rather than building compromise or working on compromise, building confidence, instead they're increasing arms spending that as if they need to be militarily active everywhere in the world. And as this is going on the rise, of course, there's also the the opportunity cost of increasing weapons. The special session on disarmament offers a unique and strong space for global disarmament. It also is a forum that could likely build that trust that is needed to find common ground to tackle these unregulated areas of military action, as well as forming the basic ground to build off of this necessary fundamental thing that all nations have in common to feel safe, and doing so through a disarmament approach rather than an arms race that we're currently finding ourselves in. The conclusion here, because I think I am out of time now, is just that common security provides both a necessary argument for why these governments need to come together for a session, but it also provides us with an understanding of how a special session on disarmament can work to increase security for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. That was amazing. It's very, you cannot really understand how countries think running an arms race will make them feel more secure. Doesn't really make sense. Now I invite our audience, if you have any questions to our speakers. I actually have one question. I was thinking, how can we build trust? Which measures can the states take to build more trust so they can go to table and negotiate?
I assume that's directed towards me, but maybe some other people have some remarks they'd like to share on that as well. But I would say, as a starting point, there's many examples in international law. I'm not an international lawyer, so I can't say I can go through all the details thoroughly, but I think one of the examples that always stuck out to me was the Open Skies Treaty, which unfortunately has ceased to be in play, but it was a treaty that in its essence allowed flyovers of military facilities for inspection, for understanding what was going on there. And just this mere action that foreign countries can understand what is going on your military bases and in your military work is a way to show, look, we're not doing anything that is provocative towards you. It's just transparency. And that's something as well that I know Antonio Guterres highlights quite a bit, is this transparency. So maybe I'll start there. I think Dan will probably have much more to say on this as well.
Sean, I think you're right on the money. Coincidentally, the book we have coming out, led by our great colleague Henrietta Wilson, which we can provide a link to in the chat, he says, hint, open source investigations in the age of Google, brings together everyone from people doing field work in South Sudan, Mr. Duke, through to people like Christian Trebert of the New York Times and Bellingcat. And the bottom line is, the boys can't hide their toys anymore. There is transparency. I didn't think Putin would invade Ukraine because I didn't think that it was, I thought it would be a disaster, and he must realize that. But he didn't, and he did. But it was no secret that he had thousands of tanks on the border. Now, every time there is some new missile, our friends have a picture of it. Every time there's a human rights observation, there are the time code, the pictures, and all of this is being analyzed. And you can bet that the CIA and GCHQ and others can do this much more. So the idea of an open UN system for verification is a huge way to build trust. In that phrase of Reagan's, trust but verify, we can verify to a huge extent now. And that is a way, even for the most hard-bitten and a techno-militarist, it is a way to build confidence. So it's a spot-on question, Amanda. And no, it wasn't a setup to get me to do a book promo, but it'll be out later this month, and it's free. While I'm on the line, I would say for anybody here from an NGO, please be in touch with us to join this impact coalition that Amanda, Monalisa, Eloisa, Sean, and ourselves are leading. We need more country and more participants, individual organizations, large and small, and now, because now in the spring is a time we can influence what may happen at the UN later.
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor. Felipe, you can ask your question. I see you have your hand raised.
Thank you kindly, Amanda. I do have a question. It was mostly directed toward this notion of common security. So I believe it's mostly directed at Sean, but I would love to hear the opinions of other members of this board. Mostly, I do have my questions. If you believe that common security or a concept of human security can be achieved in our current, let's say, institutional design in the international community that is mostly state-centered, or if we would necessarily have to redesign our institutions to see more participation of non-state entities to voice their grievances in order to achieve that. Thank you.
It's a very interesting question, and if I don't answer it directly, but let me know. I'm not sure if I fully understood, but I'm going to try my best to answer, and feel free to prod me on further about it. But yeah, on one hand, I think we need to move away from we are overly focused on state security by far, and states as primary actors. Of course, there is an important role for state security, but in my opinion, it needs to be done through this global security lens. Is really the way to look at it on one hand, and on the other hand is the local lens. States are in the end responsible for the citizens within their sovereign territories. It can get very muddy and complicated if we were to take that out of the equation. And this, in some ways, is unfortunate because, of course, there are states that do not prioritize human security. I would say the majority of states, as it currently is. But I think through a larger global security model, or at least challenging the notion of security as it's currently held, then we begin to pick apart what really makes us safe, where the priorities need to be placed. And one way in which I do find it, of course, very closely connected is that we spend so much money on the military every year around the globe. And this is money that is so desperately needed for the things that truly make us safe and impact human security, whether it be meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. We're 6 years away from 2030, and the amount that's needed per year now is more than the total global spending on the military per year. So there's no way we'll even hope to come close to achieving these without significant cuts in the military. So it's sort of a double benefit. Less spending on the military, demilitarization can make us safer on the global scale, but it also, in theory, I know there's a lot of debate over the peace dividends and what this really would mean, but this then would free up resources that really could be invested within human security, within making sure our own societies are safe at the local levels.
Thank you very much, Sean. Any of the other speakers would like to add anything? No? Okay. I was wondering, Eloisa, you mentioned how disarmament is a key of action to take the patriarchal structure. I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about it. I'm very interested in the gender studies related to disarmament. Oh. I think Eloisa is not here.
Sorry, I was just briefly disconnected. Yes, Amanda, I'm here.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I missed. Was there a question?
I was wondering if you could talk a bit more how disarmament is a key for action to take the patriarchal structure inequality.
Yes, so basically we think that it's very important for states to consider that disarmament is kind of the missing piece to achieve, humanitarian goals and also gender equality, especially if we speak about, thinking of gender equality at the United Nations is very important that we consider the way that women are actually victims of violence, especially in conflict areas, and how it's possible to consider to, enable women's not just to have a voice in international structure, but also to have their rights recognized in a situation where they have no power to act. And that really needs to bring disarmament into the equation, because the availability of small arms and light weapons or landmines in conflict areas is what really has an impact in the everyday life of women in many areas around the world, especially in the global south. And these are really unaccounted realities when we speak about women's rights. And it's important to think even of household violence, how that it's actually possible through the physical availability of guns. So it's not possible to speak, about emancipation of women or even people who come from marginalized communities if we don't speak about, ways of eliminating weapons. And that's why we think that disarmament is very important. And then, if we take an intersectional approach, it's not just about women, it's even all sorts of marginalized communities. We should think of, all those communities who don't have a voice in mainstream debates. And we actually think, as a project, that disarmament is really should be the focal point of, all development goals and human rights agendas. So we think that there could be, for example, even the special session on disarmament could be a new opportunity to combine the discourse on human rights with the discourse of disarmament, because they're actually interrelated. And because the Human Rights Council sits within the remits of the UN General Assembly, we think there could be also a procedural link to join the issues of human rights and disarmament. So this is something we are working more with other civil society groups working on human rights, as well as those focusing on gender equality. And we think to combine different issues together, because we need to have a bigger picture and recognize how different issues are interrelated. So that provides a bit of context into the work we are doing. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Eloisa. Felipe, I see you have another question.
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Amanda. If I may use your question as a hook to talk about gender, me and a few colleagues are actually starting research into the role of masculinized militarism, the cult of the offensive, and the heightened rate at which international law violations are committed in armed conflict. We have a theory that it's not enough to simply make for the inclusion of more women in the armed forces, but also to fight gender perspectives in the ideological, let's say, in the field of ideas that organizes the armed forces notions of strategy and security. I would like to ask the panel, Eloisa especially, since you were talking about this, but if the others also would also like to chip in, how can we, members of the civil society organizations, keep an eye on how armed forces are implementing this, other than simply keeping an eye for instance, sometimes institutions might issue documents about their commitments to gender perspectives, but I feel that sometimes this publication of documents might be only performative. How can we keep an eye on and ensure that transparency in this implementation of gender perspectives in order to fight back against this, let's say, domination of masculinized thinking in the armed forces? Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, if I may respond, so it's very important to consider that the presence of women in the military is kind of that satisfies liberal feminist perspectives, of women's rights, which is actually a sort of distorted version from our point of view, which kind of women have to be sort of masculinized to be to have equal rights, but that's not the way as we see it, because it's still binding into the patriarchal idea of investing in the military, and is not, if we think about all the problems that the military have, even the military buildings and camps in areas, there are studies that show how those areas, they kind of create a a problem for safety for women in the area. There are cases of more sexual violence. There have been studies about this. So it really, we are actually not welcoming the idea of just having more women into the military as a way to speak about women's emancipation. And we believe, according with Feminist International Relations Theory, there should be a total change of mindset, and that armaments and power competition between countries fits into this patriarchal ideology of power projection and competition instead of cooperation. So it is it falls within an epistemology of cooperation rather than competition. So that's where we situate the patriarchal ideas as falling to. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Any of the other speakers would like to add? Oh yeah, please, Shan.
Yeah, maybe just to add I think the importance of the inclusion of women, especially in diplomatic conversations, in the peace work, in peace negotiations, conflict resolution, and the leadership of women in these positions is particularly important as well. So that, I think, is where it's important that we are monitoring and ensuring that that states are not only involving women, but actively ensuring that they have a prominent role and are present and leading these negotiations. I forget the exact percentage, but there's plenty of studies that show that this makes the negotiated solutions more effective, more longer lasting, sustainable solutions. So I think that's quite important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Virale, you have a question as well?
Yeah, thank you all for the great explanation. I was a bit late, so I apologize if my question has already been answered at the start of the webinar here. But I was wondering, I really like the fact that you're mentioning also linkages to human rights and SDGs and other topics, because I very much think that's super important to look at, this interconnectivity. I was wondering if the campaign also is cooperating with the United Nations itself, and to what extent it's in talks with the UN about this special session, and what the UN attitude is towards a new session. Thank you.
Yeah, I can answer that. Hello, hi, Verla. It's nice to see you again. Yeah, so basically, we last year we actually made a submission to the UN Secretariat to have a special session on disarmament, including into the new agenda for peace policy brief of the Secretary General, and we have been successful into obtaining the inclusion into the policy brief, which was released last July. So that was quite an achievement for us, which kind of bolstered our campaign. And then we made more recently submission into the Zero Draft Pact of the Future, and we were also happy to see that was incorporated into the Zero Draft. So we are continuing the conversation and the campaign, and one objective is to have the special session on disarmament incorporated into the Summit of the Future agenda. And then our other goal is to have at the first committee session of the UN General Assembly, possibly this year, to have a resolution voted by states that sets a date for a preparatory committee to discuss the objectives and agenda to hold the special session on disarmament, and a date to convene the special session on disarmament. And we would like to propose that date to be 2026 at the latest. And we are also in touch with some UN delegations who have been championing a UN special session for disarmament. Especially Indonesia has been the traditional proponent as a leader of NAM. However, the proposal for a resolution was never given enough attention by other states, so there was never a significant voting to have the special session on disarmament. And this time Brazil has come up also as another supporter of a special session. So we believe that Brazil and Indonesia together may be the champions this year. So that's why we are trying to build this coalition to really bring civil society support towards the state. Because as we understand, you know, even states, sometimes they don't have just the power to make a change. They need to see, and others to see, that there is a global debate and global constituency supporting them, and that would all hopefully bring other states also to support what they're doing, particularly special session. And for this reason, we have made an open letter to all civil society organization to support a special session on disarmament. We started circulating that during the last first committee session in last October. And then we made another open letter for states to sign. And we hope that if more states sign the open letter, which we then hope to present to the UN Secretary General, you know, there will be a kind of public vitrine to show which states are supporting this objective, and that would enable other states to join the call, and that would bring additional impact. So so that's what we have been doing. And if possible, Zara, yes, thank you for sharing the open letter. It would be helpful if you could share the open letter with your networks, other civil society networks, for them to sign, and possibly also bring it to the attention of your state's delegation to the UN, for them to share with their capital, and as their foreign ministries to sign the open letter for states. This is what we are trying to do with our campaign. And thank you very much for bringing up this question, as it really is at the core of what we are doing now.
Thank you, Eloisa. I think does any of the speakers wants to add anything else? Final marks? As we are reaching to the end of what has been a fascinating set of discussions, I would like to thank all the speakers very much, and thanks to also everyone for joining us. This will be available on our YouTube channel, the recording. And we invite you to follow our campaign and social media, to write to us and join our coalition. The link, I think, is shared in the chat already by Zara. Thank you, Zara. That's it.
Yes, and as a final note, I would like to add behind the aspect of the open letter. So we are trying to actually form an impact coalition to formalize our network, basically, since the UN allows this possibility. So the 16th of May will be the deadline to apply for us and any other organization, for example, IPB represented here by Sean, and other organization who couldn't be here today with us, but we are in contact with them. So we would like to form this impact coalition. And if you are from an organization that would like to join us into advancing this UN Global Conference on Disarmament, please write to us so that we can actually formalize our impact coalition, exactly as it's called, and become a more formal group and make a more active appearance, you know, that we actually exist and we are this number of organizations. So it will be very helpful for us. So please write to us at scrap.weapons@soas.ac.uk. If Zara, if you could write again in the chat the address, we would really like to hear from all of you, and we're also interested to have more organization from the Global South to be as much representative as possible. And we please extend the invitation to your networks, and we really look forward to hearing from you soon. And thank you very much for joining and for your attention.